Welcome to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin podcast, your weekly news roundup of hunting, fishing, trapping, and conservation stories from around the Gem State. Hosted by Fish and Game's Public Information Specialist, Connor J. Lease.
And welcome back, everyone, to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin podcast. Things are going to look a little different, or I guess sound a little different, this week. Filling in for me while I'm up in Coeur d'Alene for the Fish and Game Commission meeting is our very own digital content specialist, Ben Bieri. Bieri's my next door neighbor here at Fish and Game, and for this week's episode, he and special guest Jeff Knetter, Fish and Game's Upland Game and Migratory Game Bird Program Coordinator, sit down to discuss all things turkeys. That's right, everything you've always, and probably some didn't want, to know about wild turkeys. We're hoping to put together several more interview-style discussions with Fish and Game staff in future episodes. And you know what? That's one of the most common pieces of feedback we've gotten from you guys. So thank you so much. I'll circle back around to this week's news and next week's episode, but for now, here's Ben and Jeff.
In this episode, we are going to cover the history of turkeys in Idaho, the current state of the bird, also in the state, and Idaho Fish and Game's role with turkeys. We'll also cover a few tips and tricks for hunters, cover the season as a whole. Jeff, welcome.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah.
Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I think this is going to be fun. I think this will be good for everybody. Just to start, how did you get involved in not only turkeys, but the migratory, I guess, how would you put this? Not the migratory field, but upland game birds and migratory birds. How did you get started in that?
Gotcha. So I don't know how far you want to go back, Ben.
Let's not go to little Jeffy. Let's not go there. Let's go to your career with Idaho Fish and Game and how you maybe progressed up the channel to become what you are.
Gotcha. I won't go all the way back.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important for folks to know that a lot of biologists that work for Fish and Game, I would say most wildlife biologists and fisheries biologists have both a bachelor's and a master's degree. And so for me, that started at the University of Wisconsin. I got both of my degrees there. Did my graduate work on a small shorebird called the piping plover. And from there, was introduced to the prairies and really game birds and game bird management just because of the proximity to where I was in North Dakota and the abundance of game birds there. So as I started progressing through my career, finished my degree, did some work for a small nonprofit, ran a private lands program. That then led me to the state of Idaho as a habitat biologist. Did that for about 4.5 years, was working on a wildlife management area, 2 wildlife management areas in North Idaho, primarily managing properties for waterfowl management. And when the opportunity came to travel down to headquarters and work with upland game and migratory game birds, I was fortunate enough to interview well enough, I guess, and have been in that role since. So.
I think that's all important to set context that, this has been your work life, whether it's your passion outside of it, it's your work life. And, you are a professional at this, and your words will carry some weight too. So I think that's fantastic. Thanks for that. So turkeys. We're going to talk about turkeys. Season is currently open. Has been open since
April 15th.
April 15th.
April 8th for youth.
April 8th for youth. The season closes towards the end of May.
May 25th.
May 25th, statewide.
Correct.
There's no discrepancy there.
Well, we do have some controlled hunts that are shorter than others, but for all general seasons, we've got a general youth hunt that runs from the 8th through the 14th. Then your general season runs from April 15th to May 25th.
Okay. How often do those seasons change, and what does that look like when you do have to change a season or set a season?
So I would say that the vast majority of our general seasons, especially spring seasons, do not change that often because we've had relatively stable turkey populations. Oftentimes, if we are going to make a change for turkey seasons, especially in regard to managing a turkey population, is going to be associated with fall. The intent there is that those are either sex hunts, and so there can be harvest of female turkeys, and really that's the driver of productivities when it comes to wild turkey management, is if you can reduce productivity, number of females on the landscape producing more young, hopefully reduce the population. So oftentimes the give and take there is remove harvest of fall turkeys to increase your population or increase it to decrease populations. And so most of the changes occur in fall.
Okay, so spring's pretty static.
Fairly. Sometimes we have to make some adjustments in some of our controlled hunts where we have lower population numbers. Places like the Upper Snake region or the Magic Valley where there's limited turkey hunting opportunity.
Got it. So the fall, that season, what are the dates on that?
The fall season, it kind of varies, but I believe many of our seasons are running from about August 30th to about the end of December.
Okay.
They're not all in that time frame, but many of them are.
And you said that's both sex or just?
That's either sex.
Okay. Jeff, how about, let's talk about, we've covered a little bit of the seasons. Let's talk about the overall status of turkeys in Idaho. I think just working here at Idaho Fish and Game, we get to hear that there's too many in this area and there's not enough over there. Maybe walk us through where there is abundance and how you maybe would manage that area versus, can you move some of that abundance to places that don't have enough turkeys? So maybe we talk a little bit about where the hot spots are, and then just go from there.
Gotcha. So the stronghold for turkeys year in, year out is going to be our Panhandle and Clearwater regions. That's where we have our most abundant turkey populations. It's where we have our highest harvests. It's also where we have our highest hunter success. There are also good numbers of turkeys in the southeast region. So we're Pocatello area, that's our regional office there. And then there's also relatively high harvest here in the southwest region. By and large, and this goes for any species of hunting, we have our largest hunter base in the southwest region as well, right? So you have the most number of hunters. Success rates aren't nearly as high. We just don't have the number of turkeys to support all the hunters that we have in the southwest region. But as I mentioned, the Panhandle and Clearwater have been big producers for a long time now. And as it relates to moving success around the state or management around the state, the Panhandle and Clearwater have also been sources of turkeys for other parts of the state. There have been a wide variety of trapping and translocation efforts through, I would say, the last 50 to 60 years in an effort to expand turkey populations to what I would say is present day, and an argument for turkeys that are pretty much in any suitable habitat available to them throughout the state. We don't believe that there are really any places where there's a niche for turkeys and there are not turkeys currently.
Turkeys are not native to Idaho.
That's correct. Yeah, historically there wouldn't have been turkeys here. They were introduced in 1961 near Whitebird, Idaho. And I believe those original birds came from South Dakota. I'd have to check my notes on that, but I believe those birds came from South Dakota, perhaps Colorado. And I think in exchange for either mountain goats or bighorns, believe it or not. From those initial translocations, all the original birds came from other parts of the United States. And that was pretty common technique really across the country. It wasn't just, let's move birds to a new place. There were restoration efforts going on across the country to help either, in some cases, reintroduce birds to areas where there were no longer turkeys, or in a place like Idaho where you were actually introducing a new species into habitat that they hadn't previously occupied.
those my notes say 1961, so they've been in the state for a long time. That's 70 years, close 60.
Yeah, I was going to say 65.
65
ish. 63, I guess.
Somewhere in there.
63.
So there is some of our folks grew up without turkeys.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, folks, there's a portion of our constituency that hunted, fished, trapped in Idaho that did not see turkeys when they were out and about. But especially for folks in North Idaho, it's pretty commonplace to be out and about and run into turkeys.
Yeah, talking about having so many, like an abundance. When we talk about abundance, I don't know if people have seen some of these flocks that are up there, but there's a lot of turkeys up there. Like it's not uncommon to see 40 or 50 at a time, right?
Depending on the season, yeah. I mean, typically wherever you have turkeys, they're going to be more concentrated in wintertime, right? So because the snow will push turkeys lower in elevation, and not only that, it'll concentrate the food availability as well. And so that's the time when you're going to see turkeys more prevalent on the landscape. And then as you sort of progress throughout the season, as your spring phenology comes along, the snow recedes, turkeys are going to start reoccupying some of that habitat, and they're going to get a little bit more solitary, right? Because it's the breeding season. Hens are going to want to go to their nests, and they'll be sitting on their nests for 28, 30 days or so. Then you'll start seeing turkeys again on the landscape as you've got birds that are hatched, and you start seeing broods on the landscape.
So very similar to deer.
Yeah.
The movement up and down.
To some extent, yeah. Probably not quite as dramatic elevationally or covering the same distances, but a similar concept.
What does that distance look like? What is that a typical?
I wish I could give you a typical. I don't know that there is a typical. I think it's really about setting, where a bird goes that is on Andrus WMA near Cambridge, Idaho, is going to be very different than a bird that's living just outside Coeur d'Alene, for example. There's just different elevational gradients as well as habitat availability.
Okay. You kind of touched on the incubation period. Let's talk a little bit about the life cycle of a turkey. The incubation period is
about 28 to 30 days or so, very typical of most galliform species. So galliforms are really any of our game birds, forest grouse, chuckers, gray partridge. They're typically birds that have large breast muscles and strong feet for digging and rooting around, getting food available, similar to a domestic or a domestic turkey or a chicken.
Okay. The hens, when they are nesting, what makes them vulnerable? Is it just that they're nesting? What other things? Are there predators looking specifically for those eggs and those hens? What does that look like?
So I think just inherently nesting is very dangerous, right? So you've got whatever your size of clutch is, say you've got 10 eggs that hen is watching over. So she's going to be incubating those eggs for that time period and taking very short breaks from incubation during the day. So she's going to take 1, maybe 2 breaks during a 24-hour time period. So otherwise she is incubating those eggs, having to stay alert, look out for predators, keeping the eggs warm. So yeah, she's very vulnerable on that nest. So she has to make sure that nest is concealed, probably in a position where perhaps there's an obstruction behind her, so that she can't be seen if she's not facing a particular direction. Probably wants to have good overhead cover, so that she's protected from any aerial predators, as well as have obstructions around her so that she's not easily seen by predators. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous for any bird that's incubating a nest, really.
And out of, you said 8 to 10 eggs.
Yeah, and I'd have to double check that just to confirm. I think that's fairly similar.
Out of that, how many of those, once they hatch, will survive? Is there a...
Ben, I'd be lying if I knew that off the top of my head. That's something I don't know off the top of my head, but could certainly look up for you.
Okay. On the in the wild, who is a turkey's natural predator, and when they're on the nest, you said from the sky, so there's hawks, eagles, I would assume. On the ground,
I think like many other game birds, I think that a lot of predators are going to be, I'm trying to come up with the word I'm looking for, they're going to take what they can get. So whether it's a coyote, a golden eagle, there are a variety of predators. I don't know if there's a single predator that is most important for turkeys. I would say by and large, especially in North Idaho, birds are really quite successful and productive. But there are parts of the country right now, southern United States, specifically the southeast, where they believe that predation really is an issue. And what I've heard is like bobcats can be pretty tough on turkeys. Great horned owls can also be a predator that can impact turkey populations, or at least incubating turkeys. So skunks can be really tough on any game bird nest. Raccoons, any of those sort of small, we can call them mesopredators, are pretty good nest predators.
back to the nesting. Is that once a year or twice a year? What?
Nesting is
Oh, you have a question?
Oh.
Connor has a question.
Pointing out Connor's question.
Oh,
Nesting only occurs once a year.
Okay.
And so those birds are going to lay their eggs in spring. And I guess the one sort of exception to that, if you want to call it an exception, is if that nest is destroyed during incubation, that female will re-nest. Now, if those eggs hatch and she is raising those young, it is very unlikely for her to re-nest if all of those young are taken by a predator, for example. Not saying it won't happen, but it is not nearly as common as a bird re-nesting if her eggs are destroyed. And you think about sort of the physiological demands of having to produce those eggs, and then all of the energy involved with having to sit and incubate a nest with very minimal feeding during that time. It's a huge commitment and expense.
did we talk about the time of year that this is happening? When they're nesting, when she's nesting?
Well, I guess we didn't talk specifically about that, but I was trying to think about the actual timing associated with that. We're actually looking into that in North Idaho right now. I think on a previous podcast, you talked to Mike Elstrom in North Idaho, and we are putting some transmitters on hen turkeys up there to get a better feel for when are these birds initiating nests, and that'll help us better understand. There's only been 2 projects on turkeys, and I think they were both from the late 80s, early 90s, and so we really don't have any more contemporary information on breeding behavior, especially with nest initiation and incubation at this time. So I can ballpark it. I think that we've got birds that are probably nesting in May into June, but we're about to learn a lot more about that.
That's awesome.
I just have a quick question.
Who are you? Where did you come from?
Well, I'll edit all this out. Jeff, one of the questions I have is, so far this month from other turkey hunters, I've heard that maybe it's more of like a perception thing, but how big of a factor is it when we have an early spring or a really light winter that hens, or I guess turkeys, breed earlier and therefore are less responsive to calling? And I know this kind of goes into more turkey hunting, but that's one thing I'm curious about since we're talking about breeding that maybe you can talk on is, if we have a really, really mild winter and an early spring on top of that, are turkeys out there doing the thing in like early March, or is that kind of more anecdotal hunters just talking?
So I tend to think that breeding and nesting is more photoperiod driven. You will encounter, there are plenty of hunters, myself included, that have been out in the fall and you hear a turkey gobble. You've got males on the landscape, and oftentimes that photoperiod is very similar to photoperiod, and the amount of light during the day is very similar to what they're experiencing in the springtime. So I think that's a big trigger in regard to timing of breeding activity. I think, and it's going to vary a little bit due to weather on an annual basis and how much green up there is on the landscape, but I think the nesting period is quite similar from year to year. I do think that there is annual variation, and you're going to have that for a variety of species, but I don't think it's a tremendous amount. Like, I don't think that birds are going to be breeding or nesting months earlier just because it's been a mild winter.
I did want to ask though a question too about the nest. Like, when I think of a bird nesting, I think of a robin picking up sticks and yarn and whatever to make that nest in a lilac bush. Is that similar for turkeys, or is because they're a bigger animal, bigger bird? Do they do things differently?
So they're ground nesters. They're not going to nest in a tree. There will still be a nest bowl that they will excavate to some extent, and that will be lined with vegetation of some kind. Could be sticks, more likely probably grass. There's probably going to be a few feathers mixed in there as well, because it's really important to keep those eggs warm during incubation. And as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be some cover around that area. And I don't know, I think it's pretty fascinating in regard to what a turkey must be thinking about when she's selecting a nest site, because it's springtime, right? Everything's not even leafed out yet. Mm-hmm. So they have to be thinking about what's going to be emerging and greening up as they're sitting on that net. I mean, a month is a long time. And so there's a lot that can change over a month time period.
Yeah, absolutely.
Attention Idaho hunters. Want the ultimate hunt experience? Enter now for a chance at premium tags and unforgettable adventures with Idaho's Super Hunt Drawing. With 2 drawing opportunities each year, 34 lucky hunters get to hunt in any open unit in Idaho for world-class big game. Entries are only $6 for deer, elk, moose, and pronghorn, or $20 for a combo of all 4. No license is needed to enter, and there's no limit to the number of entries. But hurry, the deadline for the first drawing is quickly approaching on May 31st. Visit idfg.idaho.gov/superhunt today for more information.
So if we go back to January 1961, when turkeys were first introduced to Idaho, what species of turkey was originally introduced, and then coming to 2024, are there subspecies that are also roaming the landscape of the state in the Northwest as well?
Gotcha. So we touched on this a little bit earlier, and in 1961, that original batch of 17 birds was from the state of Colorado, and I think I had previously mentioned that they were from South Dakota, but I can confirm that was in exchange for mountain goats at that time. And so those would have been Miriam's subspecies wild turkeys. Since then, there have been introductions of eastern wild turkeys, and there have also been introduction of Rio Grande subspecies wild turkeys. And so the concept there is that in other parts of the country, your eastern wild turkeys would have primarily occupied habitat east of the Mississippi River, for example. You get out into the more arid west, places like Colorado, for example, as well as Arizona, there would have been strong populations of your Miriams. And then Rio Grande were primarily southern subspecies of turkeys. And I think that there were attempts by previous managers to try and see how those different subspecies would succeed in Idaho and how well they would do on the landscape. And so There have been birds introduced all over the state, and there were times when I think we could still say, yep, we've got pure strain Merriams in this area and pure strain Rios. At this point, just given the fact that we've moved a lot of turkeys around and turkeys have moved around on their own, I would be hard-pressed to tell you that we have got pure strain Merriams, Rio Grande, or eastern wild turkeys in any particular part of the state. And in some cases, you could see some of the visual characteristics of a given subspecies all present in one bird. I sort of affectionately refer to the turkeys that we have here as Idaho mountain turkeys. The reality is that they've been very successful here and done very well.
For maybe there's some kids listening. You just named 3 subspecies. All of them have similar characteristics. So if a kid's looking at a picture of a tom with its fully fanned out, what I guess when the typical Thanksgiving picture, if we see that's a
That's a domestic turkey.
Just a domestic turkey. We have one sitting in the room. It's been very quiet. It's stuffed, very full. So is that the picture that a lot of these kids are seeing is more domestic rather than a wild turkey?
So your typical Thanksgiving turkey or Christmas turkey, whatever. I mean, the vast majority of those birds are domestic birds.
Sure, farmed. Yeah, all of that.
They're going to be much larger than a wild turkey. Those birds likely cannot fly any distance at all because of the weight associated with them. Wild turkeys can fly quite well.
Yeah, the first time I saw one come out of a tree, it blew me away.
Yeah.
I didn't know. Just didn't know. I saw it in the tree, came out of the tree, and I thought, Thanksgiving does not fly.
Yeah.
And it does.
So the different visual characteristics that you will see is that, eastern wild turkeys typically are larger, and they're typically darker colored.
When you say larger, weight.
Weight-wise, yeah. They're going to be a heavier bird, and probably a function of how productive the landscape that they live in. A lot more moisture east of the Mississippi, and just a more productive landscape, I would say. As you move further west, your Merriams typically have a lighter colored tail. Oftentimes they'll have very whitish tips to the end of their tail feathers, and you can sometimes see that a little bit towards the tail end of their body as well. And they're going to be a lighter bird. They typically travel more on the landscape. They're spending more time traveling around trying to find food that isn't nearly as abundant as it is perhaps in the east. And fairly similar of Rio Grande birds as well. Those birds are going to be a bit lighter colored, and they're going to be lighter. Again, weight-wise, they're going to be a smaller bird.
So we're really gaslighting kids to think that what they see in the wild is the thing that ends up on their plate.
You have to identify the we.
No, it's not we. Yeah. Maybe that's for a different podcast.
Perhaps.
How long do turkeys live in the wild? And how easy is it to tell an old turkey from a young turkey? Is it easy? And then also telling the sexes apart.
Yeah, so some of those questions, the answers to some of those questions is fairly subjective. It's not easy to tell how old a bird is, and I would say that in general, birds that are making it past 3 years in general are old birds. And it's a little bit easier to tell the age of males, I would say, because they've got a beard.
I was gonna say, does the beard length have anything to do with age?
Yes. And so the beards are kind of a specialized feather that looks kind of like hair that grows out of the chest of a tom turkey. It's occasionally found in hens, usually not nearly as thick or robust, but occasionally hens will have them. But yes, the beard starts growing, I think, about midway through the first year. And so first year birds, or I guess it would technically a bird that's coming into its first year. So if it's hatched in, let's say, late May, June, that bird will start developing a beard later that fall, and into the following year, it'll have maybe a 2 to 3 inch beard, and that bird is called a jake.
Okay.
A young tom is a jake. And then the length continues to grow. A very long beard is, I would say, 12 inches long. And that's typically associated with an older tom, so probably a 2-3-year-old. And there's also spurs that the males have as well, and in the length of the spur is also associated with age. So a really long spur, like an inch-long spur, is probably a 3-year-old bird or older.
A gray beard doesn't necessarily mean an older. The longer the beard, and they may not turn gray.
Yeah,
Do they turn gray?
Boy, I cannot say as though I've seen very many gray beards. It seems like the length of the beard, it can be impacted by a variety of things, and some of that is the terrain that a bird lives in. Like if it's really rocky and it's dragging on the ground, it's probably going to break off or wear off more quickly than it's living in perhaps a grassy landscape. And so there are environmental factors that impact that length as well. So it's hard to use that as a true tool to age.
Do you think that some of these jakes and toms do become self-conscious of their beards? And maybe I'm projecting because I've got gray showing up in my beard.
I've got plenty of gray in my beard, Ben. But I don't know. I bet you it's probably a status symbol if I had to guess. Yeah.
What about
They're very distinguished old.
Yes, the wise old turkey.
If you've made it long enough to have a long gray beard, you're a successful tom.
I feel like we're maybe on the precipice of a Disney movie. What about in the females? The aging of the females. They don't have the beard. Are they typically smaller birds by a percentage?
Yeah, I mean, hens in general are smaller than males. I would say that first-year birds are going to be smaller than second-year birds, but it would be a lot harder to tell. There are some wing characteristics that you could look at early in their lifespan, but in general, it's going to be difficult to age a hen.
Do you see the hens strut much at all, or is that typically reserved for the jakes, the toms?
I am not aware of hens strutting. Yeah, I think that's a tom and jake specific behavior, trying to attract a female.
Yeah, I only say that because it's one of the things on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, like one of the 8 facts.
What do they say?
They kind of like what you said about the beard, that it's not totally uncommon for a hen to have maybe some smaller beard, but there has been some documented times where a hen has also strutted. So I don't know. I'm guessing that's very few and far between if you haven't seen it or know of it.
I am not the authority on wild turkeys. I know that much.
Other distinguishing features, if you're driving, quickly by on the roadside, you see a turkey. They're bigger animals. They are distinguishable. You can see them. Why? I think when we look at their heads, we see a red head most commonly. Are there other colors? Like on the one we have here in the studio, there's some blue as well. I don't know if that's because of the taxidermy, the age that it's been around, or what. But what's going on with their heads? It reminds me of a vulture. Just that there's no feathers really on the head. So that leads me to think that, they're foraging. So walk us through the color palette of a turkey, starting at the head.
All right. So I guess starting with I'm not going to follow your directions.
Yeah, don't.
The male turkeys are typically darker than females. So if you are driving by a flock of turkeys, for example, and you see some larger, darker birds, those are likely toms. And your hens are going to be more brown, more. I hesitate to say faded, but they're going to be more brown. They're not super well camouflaged, but if you can, it's often the case when you've got birds or animals that are dimorphic, where the male looks different than the female, for example, that your male is going to be a little more showy, and the female, because she sits on a nest, is going to be a little more drab in color. So I guess maybe that would be a better descriptor. They both have heads that do not have feathers, and they do change colors, and that's all about blood flow. And typically when a bird is alert, it is going to have a bright red head. Maybe that's a sign that there's either stress or there's danger in the area. The males can the color of their head will change certainly when it's displaying, and yes, there are red, whites, and blues associated with that. The wattle, which is kind of the area around their neck, can get more inflated as there's blood flow there. It has a snood that comes across the bill, if you will, that kind of hangs off of there, and that can get elongated and will change shape and size as well. So the red, whites, and blues are more associated with males versus the red, which is typically a female. And as they're walking around, sort of not, like I said, stressed or alert, the color is going to be a little more drab and not very bright red, white, or blue.
The red, white, and blue makes it seem patriotic. Is that why? Do you think that Benjamin Franklin originally wanted for this to be our national bird?
I don't know the answer to that.
You can't speak to Benjamin Franklin?
I can't speak to Benjamin Franklin and the red, white, and blue. I think that he just had a lot of respect for wild turkeys and the fact that they're pretty resilient bird. And obviously this occurred after Benjamin Franklin, but really one of the best wildlife restoration stories in the country, where these birds were reduced to pretty small numbers, and now they are pretty prevalent in a lot of landscapes. So it's been due to a lot of work of the trapping and translocation that we talked about earlier, and lots of efforts among state agencies as well as partners like the National Wild Turkey Federation that have helped restore turkeys and introduce turkeys to places where they never were previously, and now provides a tremendous hunting and viewing opportunity for many folks across the country.
Yeah. Let's move into the hunting a little bit. We talked a little bit about seasons, and as we're coming to the close of our spring season, I guess we can begin talking about the fall. From your standpoint, what are some, things to know from Fish and Game when a person is hunting turkeys in either season? What are some things that our folks should be aware of?
So I think like any other outdoor pursuit, whether you're hunting or fishing, time of the field is just going to be critical to your success. And it's going to be about locating birds, locating areas where you can find sign, whether that's scat, maybe it's an area where you can tell that they've been scratching in the understory. Perhaps you saw birds there. You can pattern birds. So I think really the number one thing is going to be about getting in the field, scouting, looking for sign, identifying roost sites, roost piles. If you can find a large tree where these birds are spending the night and roosting in the tree, they will leave lots of scat below them. Oftentimes they are very visible in those trees as well at dawn and dusk. You can see, these larger than bowling ball sized birds that are roosted in a tree. You can see males display in trees before they fly off the roost in the springtime. So really, I think a lot of time that folks should spend is in preparation of that hunt and looking for turkeys and turkey sign.
And is it similar to like when you're fishing and you've got a spot? Do our hunters, well, I have some buddies that won't divulge their spot, and they are consistent. They're able to harvest every year, and they're not going to tell anybody. Is that pretty? I'm assuming that's pretty common.
I think that's pretty common. I think turkeys are a little bit different in that, we've got a fair number of turkeys on private property as well. And so maybe somebody will be able to tell you about their spot on private property because you don't have access to that, Ben. But certainly we have lots of public land opportunities available as well. So I think that's one of the unique things about turkeys is that not only are they abundant, they can be found on private property as well as vast tracts of public property as well. And so it's really a unique opportunity that if somebody really wants to try turkey hunting, there are places and opportunities to give that a whirl in Idaho.
So if they're trying and they don't have access to some private lands, there's, I would assume, I know there's a curve to that. And I would also presume that there's some things to look out for as a new hunter, particularly early in the season when I'm going to assume a lot, just out of naivete. More hunters go at the beginning of the season, fall or spring. What would a person need to be on their toes about during, like, let's say, opening weekend, and maybe they hear something? Maybe they hear a tom or what they think is a tom. What are things to look out for out on the landscape, not just necessarily for the turkey itself, but also, being cognizant of other hunters and being aware that there are other people around. Is that hunter orange? Is it, walk me through a little bit of that.
Gotcha. So typically, turkey hunters are often dressed in camouflage. It's pretty uncommon for somebody to be wearing bright colors. In fact, we discourage hunters from wearing red, white, or blue because you don't want to be mistaken for a tom on the landscape. But turkeys are known for having incredible eyesight, and so hunters go to great lengths to blend in with the landscape around them so that a turkey cannot see them. So maybe they're in a blind, maybe they're wearing lots of camouflage. So yeah, it's really important that when a hunter hears a gobble in the springtime, those are the legal birds that you can harvest. Those are males that are gobbling. That it's usually good practice not to stalk a gobble. It could be another hunter who's calling. And so really in general, the same goes for hens. Oftentimes hunters are trying to sound like a female, so they're yelping. So if someone is hearing a yelp, it could be a hen, it could be another hunter. And so just be cognizant of that. And certainly if someone's on private property, oftentimes they'll know whether or not there are other hunters on the landscape, but certainly much more of a concern on public property where there could be other hunters, just to be cognizant of the fact that other folks might be out there calling and looking for turkeys at the same time as you. So,
and I would assume also be prepared whenever you go out, be ready for the weather to change, all of those things that we talk about and that you learn in hunter's education or just passed down from generation to generation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think all of those things are important. All the sorts of things that if you are planning to be away from your vehicle for any extended period of time, make sure you've got water, snacks, something that's going to provide you warmth and the ability to stay dry are all going to be really important when you're out in the turkey woods, and make sure that you've got good navigation skills. And But great opportunity, great way to introduce kids and new hunters to the sport of hunting in general, because it's an interaction. Many hunters will describe turkey hunting as sort of the small game version of hunting a bull elk, in that they will call You've got the bull bugle, and you're trying to call that animal to you. Very similar with a gobbling turkey, where you've got a bird that is being quite loud, displaying, and you're trying to lure that bird to you by pretending to be a female.
Is there a way for people to find more information out about turkeys that we provide? And if people have more questions, who do they contact? More pointed questions about turkeys, who would they contact?
Gotcha. I don't know. I guess what I would share is that the turkey hunting opportunities that are available in Idaho, it would be hard to beat that almost anywhere else in the country. The Northwest part of the country, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, all have strong turkey populations right now with abundant turkey numbers, very high success rates among your general season hunters, upwards of 30% or more, depending on the unit. So 1 in 3 hunters are going out and they're able to bag a turkey. Those are high success rates. Yeah, it's a great opportunity. And as I mentioned earlier, given you've got an abundant bird, we've got 67% of our state is publicly owned. There are lots of opportunities, and we've got some great relationships with some private timber companies in North Idaho where we're able to provide access on those private lands to provide some additional hunting opportunity. We also have Access Yes, so hunters can go to our website, look at the hunt planner, look at areas where we've got Access Yes and other private lands available, as well as all the public lands, whether that's Forest Service or state lands, wildlife management areas. I would say that there's great opportunity. Somebody wants to go and give turkey hunting a try, Idaho would be a great place to try and start. If somebody was looking for some additional information, I think that there are opportunities to call our regional offices, and perhaps ask to talk to a biologist. Now, folks might not be able to get back to you right away or tell you what tree to sit next to in the morning, but they can probably give you general indications as to, hey, I might suggest checking out this unit, and these are the kind of habitat types that you're interested in. Might be able to get in touch with a conservation officer who's maybe a little more familiar with a specific area and can tell you more about the number of hunters in a given area versus others, bird populations, those sorts of things. So that kind of information is available. And I would say that we have staff that are willing to assist folks, but just know that we're not going to get too specific, because if we told everybody the same place, you wouldn't be happy about that as well, because we don't want to send everybody to the same location. Folks need to do their own legwork as well. And really it's all about, I think, experiencing the landscape and trying to learn something while you're out there as well. It takes time to get more familiar with an area, and what better time of year to do that in the springtime when you're maybe itching to get out after a long winter, and great opportunity to maybe find some mushrooms at the same time and just explore some great wild areas in Idaho.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for enlightening us on turkeys. I know I've learned some. I hope that our constituents have as well, and this has been a lot of fun. So appreciate your time, and until next time.
Sounds great, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.